Welcome to the 1 Month Podcast. This week on the show, we have Chris Coyier, and I'm super excited to have this conversation with Chris. Chris is a web designer and developer, and notably, he's built CSS-Tricks, which is one of my favorite resources for staying up to date with different tips and techniques mostly around HTML and CSS and all things front end. He's also co-founded CodePen, a popular coding playground for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and he's the host of the ShopTalk Podcast. It's great, and we're going to talk a lot more about that. In this episode, we'll also discuss, how did Chris Coyier learn to code? We'll talk about the question, what is front-end development? Like, if you put front-end developer on your website or you see that in a job listing, what does that actually mean? And we'll also look at some resources that Chris uses to stay up to date on web dev trends. So all that and more in this very special episode of an interview with Chris Coyier, where we talk about CodePen, CSS-Tricks, and the ShopTalk podcast.
Meeting of the Chris's.
Oh, two Chris's.
Double up. Not that that's particularly rare. Yeah. Isn't it? We're like two white Chris's in tech, like it's just a thing. It happens.
Named after, I guess, Christ. I don't really know where that came from. I was named after Christopher Robbins. What about you? Do you have a Chris that you were named after?
Well, the childhood thing was Christopher Columbus, but ugh.
We're not getting started off with some great Chris's. So anyway, how are you doing? Where are you coming from?
Doing so good. Well, through the power of the internet here, we're talking New York City all the way, across the northern United States to Bend, Oregon is where I'm today, which is lovely. I've lived here just a couple of years now, but just loving it out here, kind of out in the woods.
Yeah. Where are you from originally? What's your story?
I was born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin, so a Midwesterner who took off, which is so funny. I've lived all over the country now, and there's always people I can find from Wisconsin there. I feel like we grow them in the Midwest and ship them out,
Oh, what's going on in Madison? It's fairly urban, yeah?
Yeah, and it's a huge university town. So I think it's a couple 100,000 now, maybe 100,000 when I lived there, or when I was a kid, kind of thing. But it's a perfectly nice little town, the Portland of the Midwest or something. It's just kind of a liberal, fun, smart town in a way. But I lived my whole life there, so it's hard for me I can say that and see that kind of now, but when you live there your whole life and then left, I was kind of like, yeah, I don't see myself going back there. Sorry, family. Loved it and all, but I've kind of gone from there. But I lived all through college there. I didn't go away to college. I stayed home for college and then worked there for years afterwards. And so it was, I was in my young 20s before I even really got into the web and what I do now, and that kind of opened up some freedom for me. So the first time I ever left Madison, Wisconsin was through having landed my first job doing web stuff and having that be so clear that I could do that from anywhere. I think a lot of us are clear on now. This is a job that's very remote friendly. Or in those early days, just went to my boss and was like, listen, I want to leave, leave, not just, work from home a couple of days a week or something. I want to work from home 5 days a week. I want to come into the office never. I'm going to live across. Yeah.
Who says that to their boss? I mean, pretty much only web developers these days can have that freedom. Yeah,
it's true, and it was ballsy to pull off. But I did it but I didn't do it rudely, I hope. But I said, it's kind of take it or leave it in a way. I had to pull a strong arm because I was leaving anyway. I was very set in my ways on this. I'm like, I'll find a job out there if I have to. I can tend bar. I can wait tables. That's what I was doing anyway, part-time, I'm not that worried about this, but I have this, we have a good relationship going, we chatted all day on, at the time, AOL Instant Messenger anyway, to keep in touch. All of our client work was with email. So I sat down and was like, listen, I gotta go. I like this job though. I'd like to keep it, but I'm leaving either way. So if you don't want me to work remotely, then sorry, I'm leaving, And he bid on it. And this was, way back a whole bunch of years ago.
So was this your first job as a web developer, or what was your role there?
It was. I was a web developer. It was like 3 people. So it was like, boss man and then like a print production helper because it was mostly a print shop, making
Got it.
catalogs for companies and
That's
stuff.
that seemed to be the big trend, was there was a lot of print places that were trying to get into digital. That was like the
I mean, they
running.
still are, kinda, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but still there's some, like, "Hey, we've been producing this catalog for 20 years. We're gonna continue producing this catalog. It costs a lot of money, and we can hire some employees around it, and digital isn't our thing. We just do InDesign work or whatever, or branding or who knows what all." But this company, where it was small enough and work was just hard enough to find, perhaps in Madison, although, whenever a client was like, "Hey, can you do the website too?" The temptation, of course, was to say yes. And I think they said a lot of yeses, and then they had a web person who just up and left one day, as employees are wont to do. And needed somebody really super urgently, and that's how I got in the door, was just like, "I can make websites, hi."
Well, take me.
And they're like,
Let's
"Fine,
rewind a
come
little
on in."
bit right before then, because I'm interested in. You got into coding early. How did you start? Were computers around your house? Did you have a friend that inspired it
Well,
to you?
yeah, but not at a coding level, like in the early I was just a computer nerd from like maybe early middle school on, just through like falling in with that crowd to some degree, having friends who liked computers too. And in those days it's mostly just games.
Playing
In those days.
games.
Yeah. And not but not I think of like a gamer kid now as a little different. You play really fancy, all engrossing games just forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like back then I don't know, it's like we were into games, but I maybe didn't, it wasn't quite as like life consuming as they feel now. I don't know. Maybe that's a half baked thought, but anyway, we still liked games and would play them. And then it expanded. I just liked being around my computer. I did other things too. Then, I remember getting on AOL and thinking that was so cool. And then, oh, my mom's got a bunch of computers at her work. What do they do? And, oh, I see. They do print production work there. That's interesting. Maybe I could learn about that. And just anything computer related, the type, you're just a computer nerd. I was a computer nerd.
Yeah, I once heard somebody say that looking back, all the people that we said were computer nerds, they just discovered computers before we did. Because now everybody's a computer nerd. Like, everybody just found computers, and we're always on our
I'm sure
computers.
the average person today spends more time on their computer than I did as a nerd back then.
There you go. There you go. So you were a
You're
computer
right.
nerd,
That's interesting.
right? You were a computer nerd. You were playing games. So does it sounds like maybe this idea of learning to code just maybe came gradually because you were hacking away at things, or just kind of like pulling apart programs?
It was always design, because I always thought maybe that would be my way in, because I was into ceramics at the time, and there's just something about like the concept of being a designer that appealed to me then more strongly, and still now. Like still now I feel like, oh, I wish I was a good designer. That'd be the best. Like I still really
were you a
want to be.
designer at the time?
Kinda, like I feel like I was, or I wanted to be so much, or that was the part that I enjoyed the most. So like if we're talking web specifically, like this probably took me until after college, because I went all through college and got an art degree. So yeah, I kind of fancied myself as a designer, although just into art, period. But then it wasn't until after college when I was like more willing to just spin up a website. I'd be like, oh, we need a website for this thing. Don't worry, I'll buy a domain name, I'll point it at some hosting, and I'll throw up WordPress on it or whatever, which I still do that. But then immediately I was like, of course I want to exert control over this. I want to bring my artistic sensibilities to this and do things my way. I know what looks good. I want to exert my own self onto this website, which was the only way to do that is HTML and CSS. It still is kind of, at its core. So I was like, I want to edit this theme. How can I do that? Let me get into this CSS file. Oh, this makes sense to me. I can just change colors and change sizes and do all that stuff in here, to the point where it's like, this is so fun. This isn't just like I'm learning some little skill because I have to or something. I'm like, this is amazing. Look at how awesome this is. I feel so cool and powerful being able to do these things.
It is like a power. It is like power. I know that feeling. Yeah.
It is. It's just clicks in the right way
And then
with
people are
me.
really impressed because they also don't know how to do it, so they're like, that is so
Yeah.
impressive. And you're like, I guess I'm kind of impressive.
And there's some extra drugs in there too, because you're like, this is at a URL that anybody in the world can
go
visit.
to.
And if I do a good enough of a job, if you have any like entrepreneurial spirit anywhere in your guts, that it's really appealing there too, because you're like, what if I do such a good job that like tons of people come to this website? Can I like extract money from them in some way? Can I put ads on here? Can I don't know, sell something? Can I, if something like there's some kind of spirit there, like if I do a good enough job here, this could be like a thing. Like maybe it won't be, maybe it'll just be beer money or whatever, but maybe it will.
And you hear those stories. I mean, till this day, for sure. That's amazing. Yeah. What was the first website that you ever built?
I have a few early memories of like in college making like a little Flash website that was supposed to be like a tribute to an artist kind of thing. And I kind of vaguely remember working on that. But then I remember like the end product was kind of like a CD or something, that you like put in a computer to look at it. We definitely didn't go as far as like getting it onto a real website. So I'm like, does that count? I'm
Yeah.
going to say that doesn't count maybe.
Like a CD-ROM, I'm picturing. This is like, is that?
Yeah,
I think
right.
that's what they're called.
Or something, like I guess at the time maybe we had a bunch of Macs with zip drives on them and we put it on that or something. But the spirit was, Flash at the time was kind of for the web. I mean, that was the point of it. If you weren't making something for the web, the Flash wasn't totally necessary. You'd use like Macromedia Director or something to make it. It didn't matter. It was just a deliverable file,
Yeah. I remember all those. Flash was huge.
I learned a little bit of it to do that, but the first websites were like, oh, I better buy my name, put something up at my name. And I recommend that very strongly to this day to learners, is that what's nice about that is it's like your responsibility, but it also gives you these like stakes, like you have to do a good job with that. You are going to start showing up in Google searches for your name now, which is good. You kind of want to start establishing that as early as you can, I think. But it just, now you have like this real project that really matters in a way that if you're just poking around or just playing around and like, watching some videos or something that you don't quite have any stakes. Like if you just walked away tomorrow and never did anything again, it wouldn't matter. Nobody would care. But there's something about having something online under your own name where you have to care.
Yeah, there's something like, I want to say almost immortal about it, because if you think about the way the web caches and even the archive project, I mean, if you're putting something on the web, you're putting it out there.
May just be forever.
It
Hopefully
may outlive you. Well, one day.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's fascinating. So you were kind of, it sounds like you were learning these things as you were building. What's your process for learning a new language? Like, how did you even know how to buy a domain? Like, what do you do to learn something new?
Well, I think there's some, like, of course people can do this, right? There's millions of websites or whatever out there. Like, certainly I know, I was probably working at some little shop that had a website or something. Like, I knew it can't be impossible. I need to be able to do it. And it was just like you'd learn anything, just like, all right, let me just Google it. Oh, here's a website. Oh, wow, these things are only like $20. I'll buy one of these, like, that's cool. So I don't know. I can't remember exactly what the learning resources were back then, but I can tell you that they were kind of terrible. Like it probably took me a while. There wasn't a lot of training stuff. Certainly, there was no 1 month back then. Certainly, or anything. Yeah.
Do you have just because we're talking about buying your domain? Do you have a registrar that you? I'm just curious to learn like what you would use.
Yeah, kind of. I'm sure back then I probably used GoDaddy, and I still have 90% of my stuff on GoDaddy because there's various reasons. I mean, they've kind of went in and out of like good and bad UX, and they've had questionable management, and ethics, there's been some issues. Yeah, but there was one time, and this is a totally unrelated story, is that I had some hacker problems, right? Like I had a domain name get stolen from me. And it's kind of funny. Like if you think, how can somebody steal a website? Oh, well, they're public, right? Somebody could just get in there and steal all the code from your website and put up another website that's exactly like yours. Wouldn't that be terrible? Well, it kind of is, but not. It's not nearly as bad as having your domain name get stolen. That's like the worst thing that can happen to you online, is that your domain stops being in your control. It's ripped out from you, and it's a pretty difficult thing to pull off on somebody. So they need to really know what they're doing as criminals to do it. But it happened to me. It happened to me on CSS-Tricks, like many years in, when it was quite a little valuable property to me.
Somebody stole CSS-Tricks.
The domain name, yeah. And when they do it, these criminals are pretty advanced in that the way that they do it, they don't just like transfer it from one domain registrar to another. They like warm up a whole string of domain registrants that are ready to accept a new domain, and then right away they transfer it off of. So as soon as CSS-Tricks was stolen, they transferred it to one, transferred it to another, transferred it to another. That way, if you ever want it back, if you're going to fight this fight, it needs to traverse the same exact path all the way back to the original registrar, and it's such a pain in the ass.
Good Lord. Did you hire someone to help you with this?
Well, you know who did it all, the work? GoDaddy did all for me in my name. GoDaddy went to war for me to get it back because it was in some way their fault for played some part in the problem of it.
Wow,
not a big one. But yeah, but when somebody goes to bat for you like that, I feel like it's a kind of loyalty that is hard to buy, and I just think the people there did right by me, and there you go, you know.
That's great. Oh man, that's actually really great to hear. I know, you gave the advice to buy your domain name as well. It sounded like that was as part of what you were saying. But I've also found that I've bought domains, and if you let them expire, somebody snatches them up, and there's like the squatting that happens. Has that ever happened to you, or do you have any tips on like what do you do in that? I have no idea.
Yeah, well, it's because it's like gray hat work. It's probably the domain registrants themselves that do that, because it's probably been proven that they sell again. Generally, if somebody bought it once for years, it probably is worth something to some degree, especially if you can buy it really inexpensively, like they can for pennies. Who knows what they pay for them? Because they're their own registrant. So there's nothing illegal about it. It was your fault. That's just the way kind of it is. It like super duper ethical? Maybe not.
Gray hat. I love that.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Cool.
Even just searching for them. If enough people search for them, that triggers some kind of algorithm sometimes that makes the registrant themselves pick it up.
Yeah. Wow. So much going on.
Yeah.
What about when you started to start a career as a web designer or web developer? What was the first job that you got paid for, and how did you apply, or how did you get started as a professional?
That's that one where I was just like, oh, they need somebody right away.
Okay.
So I threw my hat in the ring, but it was kind of like, oh gosh, we have some clients right now that we're halfway through building their website, so you got to finish it. We have one client that we told that we would build a ticketing system for their website to buy tickets for events that they host. They're magicians in the Wisconsin Dells, the Rick Wilcox Magic Theater. It's great. Ooh. I think Rick is great. I think their show is really cool, and I was so happy to be building that website for them. Had I built a date-based e-commerce system before? Absolutely not. That was very nerve-wracking for me. I don't know if I would think that stuff is still happening to people, like the new developers, like, hey, can you build me this thing? And then the requirements for it are like above their head. Sometimes you just get thrown into the deep end, and you gotta solve it. Fortunately, the early days of me learning websites was through throwing up a site like a WordPress site and hacking on it. That's a nice foundation, it turned out, for me, because WordPress is such a big platform. You can generally find add-on type things to it, like a ticketing system, that meant that I wasn't totally on my own. It was hopefully a matter of just installing and configuring this thing, and hopefully we have a workable system. It was certainly more complicated, that, especially back then, almost 10 years ago now. The marketplace for that type of add-on stuff wasn't nearly as evolved as it is now. So I remember there was no just quick and easy plugin to install, but it was kind of a combination and writing a little bit of custom code and hacking things together to get it to work. But when you're really thrown into the fire like that, you level up so quickly, and you either are like, wow, that was a really fun challenge that I got done, or wow, that was stressful, this isn't for me, you know.
Yeah, totally. And how did you, so I want to talk a little about CSS-Tricks. How did you start? How did you go from, being a professional web developer to starting this site, which is in my eyes just super influential to anyone learning HTML and CSS specifically? CSS-Tricks. It's been about a little over 10 years now.
What a cheesy name, isn't it? Even when you were introing me at the beginning, if somebody hadn't heard of that site, like Chris from CSS-Tricks,
The magician wore off. Huh?
Yeah, right. I look at it. Yeah, gosh, maybe that is what it was. But what's funny is it was right at that time. I started it right at the beginning of when I got that job. And it wasn't like I'm gonna have a blog about building things for the web. I mean, it kind of was, but it was, it was nothing. Nobody was reading it. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of threw it up for fun. In fact, it was a part of a network of a bunch of little sites. I spun up a whole bunch of WordPress sites to be little kind of help sites with the very, lame little entrepreneurial goal of maybe if I write enough on these little sites and put enough ads on them that it really will be beer money or better someday. And all those other sites kind of fell away because of disinterest, and some of them were Adobe related, which is kind of funny. There was like photoshophelp.com, and Adobe was like, no, you can't do that.
So you were doing like a SEO kind of plays, trying to
a little bit keywords. Yeah, just because we didn't know what we were doing. I wasn't that serious about it. It was just a little fun side project entrepreneurial thing. I'd done a number of things like that. Like, I don't really think of myself as a super strong entrepreneur, but I do like the idea of like having a little moderate success with side projects kind of thing. And I feel like even today my career is just a amalgamation of side projects that grew up a little bit because I did, But anyway, I started these CSS-Tricks right during that time, and it was just dumb. I just write little dumb articles about HTML and CSS. All articles that are that old on the site are, there's not many of them that are particularly valuable anymore, but it was really just writing consistently over a really long period of time, which the quality gets better, the quantity gets better, it's just a little site that grew up is all.
Yeah, you are so prolific on the site. How many blog posts do you think are on there total, and do you retire old ones, or do you just keep them up?
No, I don't pull anything down. I haven't got too much flack for that, really. In fact, at least once a week, I have a couple of tabs open right now in my browser that are like, they're kind of old ones that I just know when I have like 15 minutes quick, I can just hit edit on it and go in there and clean it up a little bit, maybe point it at some new posts, point it by just put another paragraph in there that's just like, hey, update, this is a little old, but we've covered this, more accurately in newer articles, and I do it. That I don't have 100% coverage that way, but if I just fix the ones that just come up in email or come up in comments or come up through my own searches, I can generally keep things pretty up to date that way. As far as how many are on there, oh my gosh, I don't know. I've probably written 10,000 blog posts.
Oh my God.
Today.
How long does it take you to write a blog post?
Almost never more than a day, but sometimes they do. Sometimes I stew upon one for a week or two and make little changes to it. But usually a blog post is only an hour or two at most. But that's not advice for anybody necessarily. Like, I think I'm a little quick and sloppy about it, and that I think generally you'd probably want to be a little slower than I am.
Yeah, Chris, this is amazing. But I'm just gonna give some math on this. If you wrote 10,000 blog posts, and I know that you don't write them all, but that would be writing every day for 27 years.
Well, that's because sometimes there's like 4 in a day.
Wow.
It's actually, it doesn't look like it's that many, so we'll have to tone that down a little bit. But it's probably like there's probably some 6,000 some on CSS-Tricks, but then I've guest blogged all over the place. There's the CodePen blog, there's the ShopTalk where I do the writing, there's my personal site where I have a 10-year history of writing blog posts. Like if you added them all together, it probably is getting close to 10,000.
Got it. No, I wasn't trying to call you out. Just curious.
No, but yeah, that's crazy. That's
crazy, right?
yeah.
A lot of
and
people.
if a couple of them are hits, then you start doing okay.
And that's super inspiring, I think, for me or for anyone starting a new project. It's just interesting to be like, oh wow, he's 10 years now, over 10 years, that many blog posts. Yeah, you'd hope there'd be some hits in there, and clearly there was early on, but that's really inspiring. I love it.
Yeah. Anyway, you think back, it's such a different world now. Like, I wonder how things are going to change. It seems like it's mostly for the better. I feel like if I was the same person as I was back then, and I had and I was looking at onemonth.com or something, I'd be like, I'm going to take this. I feel like I would do it. I wouldn't have tried to hack it myself, or I used whatever was in front of me. I wanted any resource I could get my hands on, So it's almost nice that newcomers have this stuff today.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way when I started learning the code 2002-ish. There wasn't. I remember taking courses at college, and the teachers were learning it on the fly. They were learning Dreamweaver or something like that. But I think the thing that I've noticed, and I'm curious if this is the same for you too, is it's not just about 1 month or any school or any book, but it's really just about like kind of brute forcing lots of things until something works. The people who I know are successful, they use lots of different materials and just kind of go at it. Do you find that that's still kind of what you do, or do you have like?
Yeah, I feel like there's some kind of like of course nature to that in a way, when there's so many like. I'm trying to formulate this in a right way, but I've used, and this, apologies if this is a trite metaphor, but I think people, for some reason, something like guitar or piano or saxophone or whatever has this like established, like culturally correct way of people thinking about how to learn it, and that they're like, oh, if I'm going to learn to play the piano, I'm really going to have to dig in. It is not going to come to me overnight. I need to get sheet music. I need to like watch videos. Maybe I'll consider taking some lessons. Maybe I'll consider going to school for it, or taking something even more structured. And I'm going to listen to lots of piano music. And there's just people like get that. There's nothing confusing about that. They're like, I'm just going to have to hit it hard if I'm going to learn this kind of thing. And then they also are aware that if all they do is noodle around on it a little bit and they don't get better at it, they're like, oh, I didn't hit it hard enough. I didn't practice hard enough. And that kind of like should extend to anything. And it just doesn't for some reason. There's like people that try a little bit of coding and they're like, no, I didn't get it right away or something, so I stopped. You're like, well, you didn't hit it 6 ways to Sunday like you like anybody else would. Or it's just it doesn't matter what you're trying to learn. It could be cooking or a new language or anything. It's all the same. You got to hit it all the different ways.
Love it. I totally can relate. Well, people listening right now that are learning to code themselves, or looking for resources, what can they expect from CSS-Tricks? What are some, maybe your favorite blog posts, or just reasons that they should come and learn at CSS-Tricks?
Oh, well, that's a nice question. I kind of think of it as it's two-headed. What we don't serve at all is like, don't just like, if you're learning, don't just land on CSS-Tricks and be like, and look around the site for some kind of like, where do I start type of thing. That's kind of our failing. Maybe we should have something better about that, but it's just not a like course driven, like start here, end here kind of place. It's just not that at the moment. What it is I hope that some people, and I know this is true no matter what, is some people land there through Google searches, because we've been around so long and there's so many resources on the site. There's forums, there's videos, of course there's blog posts, but there's a whole almanac of CSS resources that cover all the properties and values and selectors and CSS, and there's videos and a job board and curated guides and all kinds of content all throughout the site, that you land there through a Google search because you're like, oh, how does intersection observer work again or something? And then you land on some article on CSS-Tricks, and I try to make that landing experience strong, that you can find what you need and it's helpful to you, and it's in plain, helpful, happy English. That's my goal with that. So that's one way that you can engage with CSS-Tricks, is just click on it in search results, because hopefully it's going to solve the thing that you wanted to. But I also hope that you just, people check it out like a newspaper. Like, sign up for the newsletter if you feel like it. We tend to, part of that newsletter is unique content, but part of it is just like, hey, what'd you miss on the site this week? So you can easily kind of look at that, or subscribe in an RSS reader, or just pop by the site and scroll around it once in a while to see if there's anything interesting to you. That's how we think of it, as a publication, as like, it's like a trade magazine, like you read it because you flip through it because it might have relevant stuff to what you're working on or what you're interested in, because it's niche anyway. Like, if you're a front-end web developer, I think you'd do well to stop by once in a while or subscribe in some fashion, because it's essentially a trade mag.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think at first I found through Google a lot of things. I remember, some of my favorite things. I remember you had one, it was like 4 tips for optimizing your website. There was a video with it, a lot of things on animations that are helpful, like how to get the back, like just these kind of little things when, it's not the kind of thing that you, when you're learning, is necessarily going to be like, day 4 of this class, we're going to learn this, because it's maybe doesn't come up until you actually have the problem and you're building. And it's at that point when you're like, damn it, like, what's the best way to speed up the site? Damn it, what's the best way that I can make the footer sticky, or whatever problem I was having, or make fluid columns. And it's like those specific things. And I think knowing that you can probably just Google like CSS-Tricks and then, fluid columns, or, best framework for this. And then, that's generally the way I've used it. And so it's cool to hear you say that that's the way you want it to be used, because it seems,
and it has to be a business too, because people work for it, like I'm sure you have going on too. So there's a business model behind it too, which is largely sponsorship / advertising focused,
Nice.
And you can sell that around traffic to some degree. You can say, these display ads are worth some money because they get a lot of impressions, so that's desirable to be on there in some way. But so that's cool. That supports that business model in some way, just having traffic because of your archives. But then there's like the idea of a sponsored blog post, which we generally do once a week if we can sell it, and that requires that people read your site, on the regular, that it comes across their feed or whatever, because they're subscribers. So to what we do, I want it to be, a sustainable thing that we can do and that makes sense to produce, but also has a sustainable business model to it. And so those two things have to go together.
I'm sure that a lot of people listening, because this has come up a lot of questions for me, would love to make a site that's something they're passionate about, get viewers, and then monetize it with ads. How do you even kind of plug into an ad network? Or is there just one big one like Google that you're using, or do you actually do all the deals with specific people?
Yeah, it's really kind of is half and half, but we don't use any major network. I wish I knew more about this, really. The reason I don't need to is because it's just as naturally evolved through so long that it's kind of just fine the way it is. I haven't had to like reinvent our advertising inventory over the years so much. It's just been a kind of a long-standing relationship with a company called Buy Sell Ads, which just so happens to have just kind of specialized in the monetization of sites that are in the like web technology sphere in a way, because there's a whole bunch of big companies that need to reach the type of techie people that read CSS-Tricks. So it's not too hard to find companies in that market, like, I don't know, project management software, form software, some kind of API driven software that's nice to, they're focused on what they're doing and they need some developer eyeballs. So they buy them from me when they can. Not that, and I'm just a small fish, but that's how that works. And so buy sell, that's kind of bridges the gap. Like they talk to those companies, find them, sell the ads, whatever. But then that's maybe half of that, and half of it has been personal relationships forged over the years too, which I'm lucky enough to have. But it's just because I'm out there and focused on this,
That's
as far
great.
as like, if you're new though, and you're like, oh, I want to make a site for, boxcars. I don't know. My favorite, I'm an arborist and I want to have a site about trees or something, and somehow monetize it in some small way. That's a brave new world out there, and it changes all the time. So even if you manage to get good at it in 2019, or at least, know the players and stuff, that doesn't mean you just know it forever, because it changes all the time. Display ads had their heyday and then they bust, and then now they're coming back a little bit, and sponsored content got big, but it does not guaranteed to last forever. And the way to, then there's paid newsletters. Those are somehow popular right now, but who knows if that'll stick around. And it's tough. Business is just a hard place to be.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I think these are all things that I've been through as well, and I'm sure a lot of people listening are wondering the same thing. So that's great.
Right. Oh, do you write a book? Well, I don't know. You used to make money writing books, but it's not so sure anymore. It has to be the perfect book at the perfect time to do anything good. Ends up being, I don't know. It's hard. You got to be entrepreneurial about it to some degree, or go work for somebody else.
Yeah. I want to talk about CodePen a little bit.
Sure.
How's CodePen? What is CodePen?
Well, it kind of, because we've started at the beginning so many times here.
Yeah,
part of it is CSS-Tricks related, in that it's so makes sense to, CSS-Tricks is full of tutorials. Here's how you do something. Here's a chunk of code that is what you do. It's so compelling to look at that, like, for real. Like, I don't need just a chunk of CSS. I need to see it work. That's the most compelling way to look at a demo like that. You can't just read about it. You can't just look at a block of code. You can't even look at a screenshot. Like, you can, but it's not nearly as compelling as seeing it work in the browser, nor is it as, true and believable when you're actually seeing the result of it in a browser. And early day, at some point I was like, well, maybe I'll, there's some other players in this market. Certainly JS Bin and JS Fiddle are two sites that are still around today that are in our, they're earlier than CodePen, and those apps had this kind of groundbreaking, at the time I thought, way of doing this for front end, which is being able to look at the code in multiple panels, like write your HTML here, your CSS here, your JavaScript here, and we'll show you the output at the same time in one browser window. It's all together in one browser window. And I was like, this is so cool. I love these sites. There shouldn't be a single demo on CSS-Tricks that isn't moved over to this system. So it's just better. It's easier to maintain. It's better for users to look at. It's better for us to look at. It's just better. But I was kind of like, well, it's tricky, because at the time I was like, well, our demo sites actually get a lot of traffic. So I wrote like a PHP include on the top of it so that I could, put our CSS-Tricks branding on it. I could put a link back to the article on it. I knew I had a little bit of, web real estate there. So maybe I could put an ad on it someday. I don't know. Maybe I hadn't yet, but I thought, why give that up? Not to mention, even at the time, I think all of us are aware that websites to some degree kind of come and go. Things get shut down in ways that aren't always pleasurable to us all, and to take something that's so important to your company, like every demo on your entire site, and put them on some other site that you have no control over. I can't brand it. I can't put ads on it. I can't control that it's not going to shut down. It was just too risky, So I was like, why don't I put a weekend project together with some of my friends who are itching to do more side work kind of thing. And we'll make a little clone of those sites in a way. But we, so we did, but it just grew up from there. Right away, we're like, this is actually pretty fun to work on. Like, this is a pretty cool little product too. We know that we're, in a sense, stepping on toes or something, but JS Fiddle and JS Bin, really to these days, I think they both have sort of kind of tried to have some kind of business model. I'm not entirely sure if they still do or are still into that or whatever, but they're just free, and we're like, we're going to come in here and try to do as a better job if we can, and have it be an actual company somehow, which is a little tricky, but it still is a little tricky because there's so many of them are just full on free. And, obviously we have hopefully a compelling free plan too that mimics what most of the rest of them can do anyway. And then our pro plans are just stuff that's on top of that.
Yeah,
Generally.
tell me about that. I mean, so it's cool that
Yeah.
I love how you inventing this came out of your need, like this problem that you had, which is I didn't know that story, but totally. I knew JS Fiddle for a while and was using that before I saw CodePen. So it's really cool to see how that influenced you guys. So that all makes sense. Now, how about now if, who's like the main customer or developer using CodePen if it's not just reading, the examples on CSS-Tricks? Like who's actually
Well, that's so
paying?
tricky. And that's, I wish I had the perfect answer for you, like you're like, well, who's the perfect person to come to onemonth.com? I mean, maybe you have a really strong grasp on that, but we're even all these years later, we're still sort of kind of trying to figure that out to some degree. There's some clear ones, like, I don't know, I'm a developer at an agency and I use CodePen to occasionally whip demos together to show my clients, and those demos need to be private, and private is a pro feature on CodePen, so we upgrade to pro and use the privacy feature in that way. That's like a pretty common use case for pro. Now, the use case for a CodePen entirely is just anybody who ever makes front-end design or it works as a front-end developer, you can benefit to have a free account. I mean, what the heck, throw up a few pens on there so that you have a bit of a presence. So it doesn't hurt, it's because CodePen has pretty good SEO as well. So maybe people can find you that way a little easier. Some people use it a little portfolio-like and get hired that way, or use it to show off, or maybe they only do private stuff, but they, we have this concept of collections on CodePen, so they gather up inspiration together. There's all kinds of free usage, but then trying to track down exactly why people upgrade to pro is a little trickier. We're always trying to figure that out. And sometimes you do a good, I mean, I think we've done a good job. We're 9 people now and profitable, and that's great. I mean, that's something to be proud of, but it's at the same time, sometimes we're like, God, I wish we could hit it a little cleaner. Like if we had a perfect client and we could, we're still figuring things out. Don't you feel that way?
Oh yeah, it never ends. I get it.
Yeah.
I'm there with you. Man, so much to talk about. This is great. What about, I mean, how did CodePen, you're working on CSS-Tricks. How did it come about to have this conversation? Hey, now let's start a podcast where, Dave is your co-host. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that? I mean, I'm so curious.
Yeah, I mean, that was simple, kind of natural progression too, is because, we weren't the first coding podcast on the block either. I don't know who gets to claim that, the rights to that one. But I had, by the time ShopTalkShow came around, I had been invited to other things like that. I can't remember if they were straight up podcast or if it just was the opportunity to chat live with somebody. Who knows what it was, but I remember feeling like, God, this is fun. It's fun to just chat live with people, especially about something so nichey and so nerdy that I kind of don't get the chance in my normal life to get to talk about so much, at least at the time. So, but I also knew, oh my gosh, I have done project overload a couple of times by now in my career, to the point where I'm trying to be a little more careful with what I say yes to.
Yeah.
I've kind of learned better now, but it's still a balance, So I guess at the time I was feeling like I really want to do this, but I'm not going to do it alone. I at least have to split the work, and it needs to like kind of feel right, not be something I'm trying to jam out the door, And I was just waiting around, and it was really Dave's idea. Dave wanted to do it. And of course I was a fan of Dave. He's a hilarious and just a good developer and an interesting guy. And so to have Dave be the guy who asks you and be willing to basically do half the work of putting the thing together, it was kind of a no-brainer. And every choice we've made since then, after recording those first episodes, has been like, how can we basically do the very minimum to make sure that this thing is like of an acceptable quality level, but takes so little effort from us, I can't, it's even now after 300 some episodes and some degree of success with the podcast, it's not a big part of my career or Dave's, at least financially, like it's just a small little thing. And the reason we keep doing this is it's not that much work, and we get a lot out of it. You get some kind of clarity of thought, and you get introduced to interesting people and interesting ideas. And on the whole, it's absolutely worth it. But
yeah, I love that. What you've done 300 episodes. That's wild. Yeah.
Which is one a week. So it's like 7 years.
Oh, there you go. Good with math. What about of all those episodes, which one stands out as being maybe one of your favorites, or that you'd suggest someone listening should go check out first?
Oh, sure. I think it's nice when we hit a topic just at the right time. Has been kind of fun. I remember in the early days of the concept of CSS and JavaScript, we had a panel discussion about that I remember really enjoying, because we it just was the right people at the right time to kind of disagree about it to some sense. And
what was the disagreement? Whether you should use certain ones
well,
for?
No, I mean, it was such in the early days that even in that, it's hard. It might be weird to even listen to now, because things have evolved so much that I don't think we probably were talking about it quite correctly. And I think even in the podcast, we were like, let's not call it CSS and JS. In fact, we definitely didn't. That's not like the title of the show. I was like, let's just call them what they are, inline styles, and then we got, arguing about that or whatever, whether that's truly what they are or not. But nobody truly really disagreed with that so strongly at the time. They're like, they're kind of inline styles, which is funny. That's not, now that wouldn't go over well. People would resist that temptation. And I was almost feel like I was trying to brand them as that in those early days, almost to stir up negative sentiment. Because I was like, was almost trying to teach people like, hey, we've done this in the past and it was a bad idea, so let's call them that name that already has a negative connotation to it. I feel much differently now, but that was kind of it was just a good one at the time, because sometimes it's nice on podcasts to just all agree with each other, but sometimes it's nice to hear some actually dissenting voices.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You're right. There's so much changes, in the web. Oh my gosh! I mean, in 5 years, 10 years, so much changes. Is there maybe one like a more recent episode, or I know you did this front end series or something that you think would be as a particular guest? I mean, it just seems like there's so many things.
Yeah, we've been into series lately, which has been kind of fun. Yeah, we did this How to Think Like a Front End Developer series, which I enjoyed doing because it was. I needed a kind of a topic to talk about. Sometimes I get invited to speak at conferences, and I was like, I think so strongly about this job that I have and how weird it is right now. Maybe I'll put a talk together on that. Like, what is a front end developer these days? That's a great question. Does it have any meaning? Yeah.
What is a front end developer? How would you define it these days?
Well, we had Mina Markham on the episode, and she, put a point on the fact that it's the browser. It's the client itself, that if you're primarily working with that in that kind of deep way that we do, that's what makes you a front end developer. You're a browser person essentially, and dealing with the client and all of its quirks. But obviously there's still a million things to talk about there. But what I wanted to do for my talk was to not just have it be me and my thoughts, but to have it be as many of more people's thoughts. So I intentionally chose different people. Like, Peggy Raises from Apollo is a great front end developer, but she's so focused on GraphQL and the data layer of the front end. Like, that's what Apollo does, and that's what she's really into and talks about. And that is so far away from somebody who considers themselves like an HTML and CSS specialist. They're both front-end developers because they work on technology that runs in a browser, and they're both caring about users, and they both care about accessibility and building websites, but their day-to-day work feels like it just couldn't be any different.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah. I never even thought about it that way.
And yet they're both even self-identify as front-end developers, and job boards just willy-nilly throw up, hey, we're looking for a front-end developer. Who applies for that job? Peggy or Brad Frost or Samira Kapila? Like, which person is right for that role, knowing that the spectrum of knowledge is so crazy wide at front-end developers? So that series, I think, is good, and it digs into that idea, and it doesn't necessarily come up with any conclusions, but it comes up with, this actually has been a bit of a problem, at least from the communication and hiring angle. So because this is so confusing these days, if there's any wisdom to be taken from this, it's that this terminology is too broad right now. And if companies are hiring, they need to use their words a lot better at describing what they need.
I love it. This is great. Well, I want to just do a few rapid fire questions to finish off, and then
Hey, I got one quick one for you though too. Remember when I talked about the CSS-Tricks domain name got stolen and I eventually got it back? I never met the person, the criminal, but the criminal was willing to talk to me. And there's an episode of ShopTalkShow where that criminal, through various like obfuscation methods, I got onto Skype and we had a conversation, recorded it and published it to ShopTalkShow back in the day. The actual
amazing.
criminal. So they talked about their motivation of why they did it and just got into their criminal crap. And they're still just a criminal. They didn't apologize or, or say that it was wrong what they did in any way. It was just kind of a, let's talk about this.
Do you know the name, or I guess maybe afterwards I can try to find that one.
Yeah, it was like Interview with a Hacker or something.
Interview with a Hacker.
I'll send you the link.
I will find that and I'll put it in the show notes for the podcast. I love it. Okay. All right. Got a few rapid fire questions. So, what is, just in your opinion, all your opinion, what is the best language to learn now if you're looking to learn to code, and specifically if you want to get a job? I know that's super broad, but is there anything trending that comes to mind?
There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's definitely JavaScript. There's no other alternative there. I mean, I'm sure some people might argue for Python or being like an AWS specialist or something like that, but the language of JavaScript has absolutely exploded. It's showing no signs of slowing down. It makes you useful on front end and back and in all spectrums of the front ends. I mean, that's just the way it is. It's JavaScript for sure. Not that and as a longtime person who, even resisted JavaScript in the early days and whatever, like I'm not trying to devalue anybody else's skill here, but if you're saying what language matters right now, that's the one.
Great answer. What is your favorite IDE or text editor at the moment?
I think I'm on VS Code with most of the rest of the world. I although I say that, I'm almost kind of like cockily or somewhere, but just in the last week, I heard from somebody that was using TextMate. I'd heard from people that are still on. I shouldn't say still on. That's the wrong attitude to have here. You can use whatever tool you want, dang it. But I definitely have one developer still on, I said it again, but on Sublime Text and Atom and stuff. There's lots of editors out there, but I'm on VS Code and I have seen a massive movement towards VS Code. Like, it's a very powerful editor that people are having a lot of success with, and I see a lot of value in. So it's big, but it tends to change though, doesn't it? Every year or two, there seems to be a big movement towards something new.
Yeah, it looks like that's the way things are going. It's super interesting to watch. What about resources that you use or that you would recommend? Obviously, other than all the ones that we've mentioned that you've been working on over the years. But what other resources do you learn to keep up to date? Maybe newsletters or podcasts or blogs? How do you keep up to date?
Yeah, that's a good one. I probably get more newsletters than I know what to do with, if there's anything related to web development at all, and I run across it and I feel like I haven't subscribed yet, I subscribe. I'm a little bit of a junkie that way. So, but one of the ways that I do it is to use I still use an RSS reader. I like one called Feedbin. I don't know. There's so many different ones out there, but I think even if I hadn't been subscribing to feeds for years, I'd still do it now from scratch, because it's such a nice way to, you're on somebody's site and they wrote a good blog post and they clearly have an RSS feed. I'll just slap it in there, if I haven't already, which means that now, instead of like going to all these different developers' blog sites to catch up with them. When they publish a new article, it just flows into my feed bin. Feed bin is just this reader experience, and I probably pop in there once, twice, 3 times a day, and I'm always behind. I don't have any pressure to keep up with it, which is to some sense why I like it. It's not like email where I feel like it's my responsibility to get through it all. This is like, they're just articles. If I don't read them all, so be it. So
Cool.
there's less pressure in there, but it gives you this email address that you can sign up for newsletters with too, which is kind of nice. So they're not necessarily in your inbox, because a newsletter is largely just an article with a bunch of links in it. So I tend to use Feedbin to subscribe to my newsletters.
That's cool. It's surprising. I feel like some people don't know what RSS is even. I feel like in my teaching, I have a lot of faces that I teach at Columbia as well, and sometimes I'll say RSS, and people I could just see in the crowd, they're like not getting it. But it's interesting. It's definitely an amazing technology, and Feedbin is a really cool way to do that. So I think if somebody's interested, you could look for the RSS like on the site, or probably just try to go to /feed or /RSS on the domain, and maybe that will work.
Yeah, that's tricky too. Like, does this site even have an RSS
Does it
feed?
even
What if it does? What do I even do with it? Like, I get it. The technology is not great. The UX around the whole thing, totally bad. But do you find, I guess you'd only seek all this stuff out if you are like, do you wish you read more about this stuff? Do you wish you were more immersed in it? Do you wish you didn't miss posts by some of your favorite developers or whatever? If you feel like it's too hard to keep up with these things, then maybe give it a shot.
Cool. Lots to keep up with. Chris, it was such a pleasure having you on the show and getting to talk about all the projects you've been working on. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, likewise. Thanks for having me on.
If you want to learn more about Chris, you can check out his site, CSS-Tricks.com, or listen to his podcast. It's a front-end web development podcast called the ShopTalk Show, just iTunes ShopTalk Show. If you would like to learn to code, you can do that with me. As Chris said, JavaScript, it's not going anywhere. It's exploded. It's one of the best languages to learn now. I teach a JavaScript course at 1 Month, so you can go to onemonth.com if you'd like to learn more JavaScript with me. My advice would be, though, if you're going to start learning JavaScript, you really need to know some HTML and CSS first. So I would suggest you learn some HTML, which is a course I also teach, and Chris also has a lot of things on CSS-Tricks that you can learn. So I'd say between these two resources, you will have a pretty good start. Come visit my site at onemonth.com. If you have any questions, you can email me. Let me know what's on your mind. You can email teachers@onemonth.com with any of your questions, and we'll help get you started. Sometimes getting started is the hardest part, and I recognize that, and that's why I'm passionate about making this podcast and hopefully giving some context to how people who have become really successful web developers and made these awesome things, like how they got started, and I think you can do it as well. It's awesome. So I wish you the best. I'm here for you. If you have any questions, you let me know. And I think that's all for this episode. If you want to hear more episodes of this podcast, you can find them on iTunes, Spotify, or on YouTube. I would love it if you could rate the show. Love it, love it, love it. If you can rate the show, just say something good about the show. It just really helps to share the show with more people. Just gets it out there to more people. Or share it with a friend. All of that is so helpful. So thanks again for listening. If you have any questions, let me know. And I'll see you in another episode next week. Bye.